You come almost to the end of where there is green commercial agriculture, and there you find Red Willow Vineyard. Waiting in the shade is Jonathan's father, Mike. In the shade of the chapel, he shares with us stories of how this all began. These are the stories of the beginning of modern Washington wine. Well, since we're standing in front of the chapel, can you tell us the story of the chapel?
Once again, it's a story about David Lake. David, we had grown Syrah for a number of years with him, and the first planting was behind us there. I'm sure John showed you that. And as we're developing this hill of Syrah blocks all around it, he jokingly said, "Now you need Syrah on top of a hill."
A chapel on top.
Chapel on top of a hill. And we're a fairly spiritual family. I liked the idea. I had been to Italy, and there were a lot of just little grottos or crosses or chapels throughout. It was very European, and we had always considered the sites kind of like Europe. This little hill had an identity, that slope had an identity, whereas so much of America at the time was 80 acres, and you develop this and you develop that, and we always had planted different varieties and different slopes, and we identified with the European image anyway. And so anyway, David mentioned you need a chapel on the hill now, jokingly, and we talked it over, and let's do this. I had a guy working for me from Mexico. He was a stonemason, and he had done some other rock work for us, so we said, let's build a chapel. And I had no measurements or no real, just a rough shape of one of the famous chapels in the Rhone. And so we just started building it. Took Ezekiel 3 years to make it. We had a rough shape that we wanted to have.
And we had piles of rocks that we had moved from the vineyards, so we had a good supply of rocks we could use.
And then I found you build a chapel, you have to explain it. But it's been an identity for our vineyards. It's not a marketing thing. It's a place for our family, a place to pop in and say a few prayers, and it's a connection. I often tell a story. There's a book that really has a neat paragraph talking about great bottles of wine, and George Rainbird, An Illustrated Guide to Wine. And it's something that I believe, but once in a while you read something and you say, that's what I've been trying to put into a short, concise paragraph. And he talks about a great wine, it's like four legs of a stool. The terroir is kind of one of the legs of the stool, something that's a soil, a site that just imparts a character to the wine that nowhere else does. And today terroir is so overused. I mean, everybody that's got a piece of ground has a terroir, and they've expanded it to so many things, but the essence is still that site and what it gives you. Maybe the slope and the soil and those things. The second is the variety is very important. And Europe has taken centuries to discover where we plant Merlot on this side, this bank, and we plant Cabernet on this bank. And yet Washington, even though I've been doing this for 50 years or so, it's still a relatively undiscovered area. And so discovering the varieties, where you grow them, and I've eventually come to the conclusion that Syrah should be on our poorer soil and our Cab should be on relatively better soil for us. So that's the second leg of the stool. The third leg is the work of human hands, the grape grower and the winemaker. And we have 30-some wineries we deal with. Some of these blocks of Syrah will have 3 or 4 wineries sharing that block, and we picked them maybe a little bit differently and stuff, but it's amazing to taste the wines from 4 different wineries from the same block, and they're quite different. And I'm sure if we went and managed a different vineyard after 5 years or so, and somebody else came in here and took over, there'd be changes. So the work of human hands, and then the last leg of the stool, he talks about every once in a while, by divine grace, you have these magical vintages. It's that part of the wine that none of us control. It's the season, the vintage, Mother Nature, the hand of God, whatever you want to call it. But it's what makes wine interesting. It's something that great vintages, you don't just snap your finger and duplicate. And a lot of winemakers, we often talk about, man, that thing turned out good. What in the world happened? Let's try to duplicate it, but a lot of times you have these fabulous years, and it's
one of a kind. That's what makes it magical.
Yeah, they are. And that's something that's more recently, I think Americans and at least speaking for myself, maybe realizing the difference in vintages.
Yeah.
And Europeans, they talk about vintages all the time. Oh, that was a fabulous year, 47 and a 61, and some of those.